Ich sehe sie nirgends.
Hi. Hi. Hey, der Teller glänzt ja schon. Ohne Abtrocknen.
Zweimal geändert. Hier die neueste Auflage der Band. Übrigens, den zweiten Drummer kennen wir von den Yes. Und der Titel der Gruppe jetzt: Lark's Tongue in Aspic.
It's March 1972 and King Crimson are drifting apart. On completing their Islands tour, the core of the band, Ian Wallace, Boz Burrell and Mel Collins, decide to stay in America in the comforts of a more blues-orientated style of playing. This left band leader Robert Fripp alone, and he returned to England in search of not just a new band, but a whole new musical direction. Initially, he had ideas of forming a new band with drummer John Heisman of Colosseum, Mark Clark of Uriah Heep, and Crimson associate Keith Tippett, but this failed to materialise. Fripp began a period of soul-searching and reflection, and in doing so, found a deeper, more spiritual place to help guide his next musical ventures. To inspire him and lift his darkening spirits, he sought comfort and refuge in the music of Hungarian composer Bela Bartok. In interviews around this time, Fripp talked honestly and sincerely about his growing interest in pagan magic and occult spells, specifically the ancient rite of pyromancy, the art of fortune telling and fortune moulding through candle, colour and fire. The central idea of this millennia-old practice is that the fire flames emit vibrations and energy that can alter the mind and the world of its receiver. Different coloured candles are thought to emit different energy, and in doing so can help achieve specific goals and desires. Guiding Fripp on this mystical journey was the self-proclaimed White Witch Wally Elmark. She was the person who gifted Fripp much of the religious jewellery that he wore around this time. The two had been working on an album together that was supposedly to combine her spoken word poetry with Fripp's ambient heavenly music, Frippatronics. Elmark's observations during the band's US tour earlier that year suggest that she could sense an uncertainty within the Crimson camp, and that Fripp himself was in need of some Wiccan magic to rediscover himself before the band could be reborn from the flames. Fripp's sincere belief at this time was that his and Elmark's spells did indeed work, as one by one, new band members started to present themselves to him. The first sign of a new Crimson light emerging from the shadow of the old was when drummer Bill Bruford finally accepted the offer to leave Yes and join Fripp in the new band. Fripp had been courting Bruford about the idea of joining Crimson for some time, and he had first met the drummer when Yes and Crimson toured together earlier that year. The next musician that Fripp summoned was his old college friend John Wetton. The story goes that one day in June 1972, Wetton found himself unexpectedly driving near Fripp's house and completely unannounced decided to pay him a visit. Fripp believed that it was his magic that led Wetton to him. David Cross was the next to be lured into Fripp's new realm. Again, by chance or fate, Cross found himself playing in a band that was managed by the same management company as King Crimson, and Fripp received an invitation to come and see Cross's band. It was here that the two discussed the idea of creating a new King Crimson, one that was to create what Fripp described as an album of improvised Indian-style ragas. The final and perhaps most essential and influential element to be summoned to the Crimson King's new court was abstract percussionist and all-round old-fashioned eccentric Jamie Muir. Muir had been playing in various experimental bands around this time, most notably David Bailey's musical improvisation company. He was suggested to Fripp by a melody maker writer, the idea being that Muir could provide new colours and textures to the band and fill the parts in between the notes, as it were, in the same way that Tippett did on Lizard. Fripp warmed to the idea that Muir could bring a certain unpredictability to complement Bruford and his own, for that matter, otherwise tight and well-disciplined playing. It's this notion of opposites attracting that will become a central theme in the new Crimson's identity. Over that summer, the band started rehearsing together in London's Covent Garden, and after a photo session there, the melody maker announced to the world that a new Crimson was indeed rising from the ashes of the old. It seemed that Fripp's magic had worked. As the island's era Crimson was drawing to its end, their live playing was morphing into a comfortable American-sounding blues rock. Our new Crimson, however, does a complete 360-degree turn, with press reports at the time correctly likening them to the likes of Mahavishnu Orchestra or Miles Davis. However, there's something different going on here, with the band mining a more European and even pagan, organic-sounding vein, as if they were creating a soundtrack to a Grimm's Brother fairy tale or Hieronymus Bosch painting even. Always a dynamic band, this new Crimson was built even more on stark contrasts, bright light and ominous dark, with little shade to hide in. It combines myth with mirth, beauty with brutality. This notion of opposites living in harmony is all perfectly captured in the album's cover. This sun-moon combination has been used for thousands of years and is generally thought to signify balance and unity between opposites, one that brings balance and order to all things. The design was created by a graphic artist called Pete Douglas, and his simple approach captures the tone of the music perfectly. In researching this documentary, I spoke with designer Pete about this cover. He told me that after leaving art school, he spent a year in India and drew inspiration from the Tibetan Buddhist art and philosophy that he saw over there. He met Fripp through a mutual friend in the music business, and when they met, the guitarist outlined to him what he wanted. The sun reflects the album's power, drive and energy, while the moon represents its more reflective, introspective and mysterious sides. The symbol also represents rebirth and the renewing cycles of destruction and creation, all of which would have been themes in Fripp's mind around this time. I asked Pete what his opinions were of the actual music, and he said, diplomatically, that he didn't quite know what to make of it. I have to confess, I kind of get his point. The album's title was coined by Muir, the idea being that it reflected something musical and delicate trapped inside another form, namely aspic jelly. The idea of the larkbird's tongue being eaten by ancient Romans to help them sing better is something of an urban myth with no historical basis. However, they were known to eat the tongues of flamingos. Perhaps the reference to larks comes from Cross's sweeping violin playing on the title track, which echoes composer Vaughan Williams' Lark Ascending piece. Either way, it's a superb phrase and much better than other Roman delicacies such as wren's liver, jaguar's earlobe and wolf nifflechips. So, what does lark's tongues and aspic actually taste like? Well, let's break apart the album's yin from its yang and feast upon what's inside. Our album begins with Muir's whispering kalimba flum piano and glockenspiel. They play an intertwining gamelan-style melody that evokes ethnic and tribal worlds. Various gentle percussion elements are slowly layered as the melody evolves into a dreamlike cloud of cymbals. A foreboding violin melody creeps in as the clouds begin to darken. As this introduction is so delicate and quiet, the listener has had the volume turned up, and with this is the album's masterstroke, as it uses volume as an instrument, a weapon even, as the music suddenly rushes in. And before the listener can reach for the volume control, they are floored by a crashing smack in the face of musical instruments. Skips and darts across multiple sections with percussion instruments scattered everywhere. It's like a cross between a Hammer horror movie and the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Each minute is more frenetic and powerful than the last, with Fripp's complex mathematical guitar scales providing order within the chaos. Eventually, the track reaches a climax. Here, the album's ideas of opposites and balance are fully realised. Aggression to calm, loud to quiet, yang to yin. Personally, I feel that this section stays around slightly too long, with the initial awe and wonder of the track being slightly lost. However, it soon regains focus as another threatening, stabbing violin line ushered in. Beneath the terror, we hear a woman in distress, a crying child, and a judge sentencing someone to death. These voices are from the TV adaptation of a novel called The Weir of Hermiston. The story is set in Edinburgh, where Muir grew up, and it's likely, therefore, that this is what drew his eye to it. It was aired on TV at the time that the band were finishing production on this album, and it's thought that Muir recorded it by holding a microphone up to the TV. And this is what he watched that night.
He used to go over there and I'd come and pick them and take them home. Did I ever show you where the persecutor shot the praying weaver, my dear? I want to go home, mother. I must take my walk. My Lord's orders, you can. Take time off your piety books and your sins. Go for a walk. It's good for you, dearie. How are they in it? He's in gone. It's a sad story. He used to come here and pick the flowers and think of the strange ways of the Lord and His glory.
I wouldn't worry about that sore throat of yours. A good hanging's the best cure for it, I know. Second job. It is the sentence of this court that you be taken from this place to the Tolbooth of Edinburgh, and there by the hands of the common executioner, be hanged by the neck upon a gibbet until you are dead, which is pronounced for doom.
Several band members have confirmed that they made a concerted effort to time the voices so that the final section crashes in at the exact moment that the judge pronounced the death sentence. As the whole track ends, we hear more unnerving voices. Like an occult chant, they mumble incoherent words. In reality, what we hear is various band members' voices talking gibberish over one another. They may be reading random lines from newspapers, and from what I can make out, Bruford seems to make reference to the fact that he has no idea about what he's saying or why he's saying it. With more musical ideas than most bands can muster up in a lifetime, this is one of the best pieces of music that I personally have ever heard, and for years I've played it to bewildered friends as an example of just how weird and exciting the music I listen to can get. If they're ever looking for evidence to lock me up one day, this could well be Exhibit A. Jamie Muir drafted out lyrics for all of the Lark's Tongues tracks, but they were scrapped, and John Wetton's childhood friend and founding member of Supertramp no less, Richard Palmer James, was brought in to write new words for his melody here. James wrote the lyrics in isolation from the band, and he was simply sent demo tape with a rough idea of what was needed. Whilst lacking the rich visual aspects of Pete Sinfield's writing, they do complement the music well. And here they conjure up overlapping images of a broken relationship, as if someone is leaping through a scrapbook or a photo album, with the memorable photos of these nights out and parties often being taken on a Saturday.
You make my life and times a book of bluesy Saturdays, and I have to choose.
John Wetton's voice has a slight coarseness and sadness to it, a lived-in quality that provides an honesty and sincerity to the words. It's a welcome pause and reflection after the album's initial onslaught. This song was developed by Fripp and David Cross during the band's first rehearsal in Covent Garden, and the main theme stems from a strumming ballad called Mantra that was played by King Crimson back in 1969. The song opens with some classic Muir-inspired found sounds achieved by rubbing the inside of glass tubes, kind of like wine glasses, part industrial, part animal. From this dense fog, forms begin to slowly emerge in the shape of mellotron cello strings. The vocal is similar to Book of Saturday, and it has a weariness to it, as if we're listening to the yearnings of a tired traveller. Wetton plays piano here, and combined with Fripp's thoughtful acoustic guitar and Cross's soaring violin and mellotron, the track invokes the spirits of the band's earlier albums. But it's Fripp's exquisite and liquid-like playing at the end that is its real high point. Muir's quip about the artist existing to serve the music and not the music existing to serve the artist is perfectly illustrated here, as Fripp's playing throughout the whole album always seems to be in the right place at the right time, combining beauty and menace in equal measure. Originally, this Fripp-Wetton composition opened with its theme played out on a mellotron before cutting into the stomping intro that we all know and love. The band sound like they're having real fun here, with a tight groove, quirky lyrics, and all sorts of sound effects to bring our villain to life. The track is a more raunchy and ballsy update of Island's Ladies from the Road, which similarly alludes to sex and prostitution. But this time, it's more from the view of a pimp or a drug dealer perhaps, someone who seems to exploit others. When played live, the lyrics were altered to reveal an even more sinister side to our protagonist.
I argued with the judge, but the bastard wouldn't budge, 'cause they caught me licking fudge, and they never told me once you were a minor.
The whole thing foreshadows the quirky, streetwise edge that Adrian Belew would bring to this band years later. This track opens with a whirling sound of a trumpet cum vacuum cleaner tube, creating an unnerving buzzing like a swarm of hornets darkening the night sky. A cold wind stirs as Bruford's ominous percussion slowly begins. The talking drum itself is an instrument originally designed for ritual and ceremony, and this notion is perfectly captured, with each layer sounding more imposing than the last. It's as if the band are dragging the listener towards one final audial slaughter. The hypnotic tension grows with the ominous rhythm moving closer and closer until finally it jumps up and grabs us with a harrowing scream, as if the Larks themselves have finally broken free from their captivity. Fripp was immersing himself in classical music at this time, and the sharp, stabbing riffs here reveal his love of Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Stravinsky's music is centered around the ancient pagan rituals of dance and sacrifice, and one can't help think that these themes influenced Fripp and his approach to this whole two-part epic piece. In many ways, Lark's Tongues Part 2 is a wonderful summary of the whole album, with crisscrossing rhythms and interweaving patterns that evoke ancient ceremony. Stomping around like an angry, brutish thug, this track provides a blueprint for the style of playing that the band would largely employ over their next two albums. Bizarrely, the track ended up being used in the 1974 porn movie Emmanuel, with a version that sounds like it's straight from the Lizard recording sessions. And seeing as the film shows more than just the colour of this girl's crimson suspenders, we'll leave things right here. The album was released in March 1973 and reached number 20 in the UK charts and 61 in the US. It received a mixed reception on release, with some writers believing that the album didn't quite match the ferocity of the band on stage. Over time, however, its legacy and standing have grown substantially. The Lark's Tongues album and this era of Crimson became a huge influence on a host of other rock bands across industrial and grunge and lots of metal genres. The band took to the road in the spring to coincide with the album's launch, but after a few shows, Muir unexpectedly left the band. The band's management concocted a story that his absence was due to an onstage injury, but in reality he wanted to pursue his growing passion for Buddhism, and he joined the Same Ling monastery in Scotland and lived there as a monk in quiet retreat for many years. Lark's Tongues in Aspic is a difficult listen sometimes, as if it's an album to be appreciated rather than enjoyed. It's like meeting an awkward friend whose company, whilst captivating and memorable, is one that you breathe a sigh of relief to when they leave. The band members' own opinions summarise it well. Bruford has stated that it was hell on earth to make, and as they just couldn't decide on what type of music they really should be playing, and sort of hope for the best. In saying that, Fripp has noted at this time that the band was more King Crimson sounding than ever before, supporting the whole notion that this band does indeed have a life of its own, regardless of what the lineup is. Conjured up in an era when many bands were arguably peaking, this album still has an unnerving and otherworldly magic, and it hasn't dated in a way that many albums from this period have done. Fripp's savage sorcery lured listeners in with an angry and angular alchemy, at a time when most other bands were calling us to hear more softly spoken magic spells.
Could I do one more immediately?
The sun has got his hat on, hip, 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 hooray! The sun has got his hat on and he's coming out today. Now we'll all be happy, hip, 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 hooray! The sun has got his hat on and he's coming out today. He's been tanning niggers out in Timbuktu. Now he's coming back to do the same to you. So jump into your sunbath, hip, 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 hooray! The sun has got his hat on and he's coming out today.